It is 10:45 on the dot right now. Welcome. Thanks everyone for joining this group. I want to introduce myself. My name is Rosie Ayala. I'm with the Foundation for Tacoma Students in Tacoma, Washington. The original design of these sessions were intended to have 2 people per session. So my co-presenter unfortunately was unable to come here today. However, they hail from Chicago, so National Louis University. If you want to look them up, they do a lot of work around students, those that are transitioning into 4-year colleges out of a 2-year school. So feel free to visit them. The name Jennifer Robbins specifically, that was who the co-presenter was intended to be. And I'm pretty sure that they would be okay with their information out. If you haven't noticed in your packet, their email is also listed. So we are here to talk about innovation in our spaces. My professional background is youth service programming, and so I hope to engage you all in some of the practices that we do in youth service programming as we work through this innovation space. And so one of the things that we always do is begin with a check-in. Check-ins for a group this large, not going to work. It's going to take a long time. So we're going to do a group check-in. So we're going to do a little what we call a thermometer. So the question is, how is your energy today? Thumb up, high, and then all the way down, you kind of measure kind of where you're at. So let's do our thermometer where we're at. We have, some lows, mostly highs, some sides. All right. So that's really helpful to me as I kind of go through this process, whether do I want to be high energy, do I not, how do we bring those that are here, maybe a little to the middle, and so hopefully we can do that through this session. I'm not quite sure what just happened there. Oh, there you go. All right. So a little bit about Foundation for Tacoma Students. We are what we call a backbone organization. We started probably about 10 plus years ago. Our functions to the city and service to students and to our community partners are connecting and convening, professional development, aligned funding, data analysis and transparency, and policy and advocacy. We did not necessarily narrow down these functions up until I would say about 3 or 4 years ago. Prior to that, it was a lot of like, what are the community needs and what are the gaps that we're seeing in community? So, and I'll share a little bit later, but part of the reason the foundation came to be what it was, I'll share, was it began with tragedy. So if you think of the pandemic as tragedy, it has gathered and galvanized people to come up with solutions and to work together. And so the foundation kind of had the same spirit, and I'll share a little bit on our network. So part of what we do with connecting and convening is gather networks. The Tacoma College Support Network specifically predates the foundation by, I would say about 2 or 3 years. And so this came to be when the Tacoma Public High Schools had a really low high school graduation rate. And so this made national news. And we had the assistant superintendent of our public school district, an organization called Adult Success Foundation, which had staffing at each of our high schools. And then I believe it was Dean of Admissions at our local community college. Those 3 came together and said, hey, our graduation rates are really low. What do we do? Like, how can we change this? We need to do something. And these 3 people eventually galvanized community and slowly started to work to essentially make movement, whether it's to bring more partners in, whether it was to change laws, to introduce some funding streams. And so with it brought together a lot of energy, and it really brought community together around aligned messaging. And so when we call it TCSN, So when TCSN joined the foundation, aligned messaging was a big part of what we did. How can we have one goal where all of us work together and ensure that whatever decisions that we make, we are working towards this one goal. So in 2020, our goal was essentially high school graduation and college enrollment. Long story short, we met 2020. Our high school graduation rates went through the roof, beyond what we expected. However, our college enrollment rates stayed steady, if not declined, in some circumstances. And so what we realized is that we need to do things differently. We met half the goal, the other half needed a little more attention. So we had to come up with some essentially guiding pieces. And so what we realized is we as service providers were not the ones with the answers. If we were, things would have been fixed, right? Can we all maybe agree, not agree? So really it's community that has a lot of the answers. And institutionally, we have a history, and I really appreciate our keynote this morning. Like, the system is not necessarily designed to center community in the decision-making of what we do. It's not designed to allow space for creativity, for space to essentially question the system, change the system in a very direct way. And so what we could do as the foundation, what we were able to do, was essentially provide the platform for community to come together to inform some of these decision-making pieces. So our value was essentially equity at the center. So we need to target or work towards elevating those that are most not disinvested, but where the system has historically disinvested in them. Data-driven decision-making. So everything that we do, we need to start with data, assess, and then redo with every single data piece. We wanted to focus on systemic interventions, so anything that could be scaled to a whole district or more if possible. And also, most recently, doing some advocacy pieces. So though our service is to the school district, if there is any kind of intervention that we could do on a policy level that can support the district, or the county, or the state, we will also engage in that, while kind of servicing the stories of our students, of our partners, and of our families. So this is a graphic essentially tailing to, the data is 2012, so from 2012 over to 2019, this is our declining college enrollment rate. So we surface this data to our community. And then we surface this. Same data, but disaggregated. So any comments, kind of thoughts around this before I move on? And I'm really good with teacher pauses, so I can let silence sit.
It's hard to read the student groups. I don't know if you can.
Oh, yeah, let me do that for you. So here we have our Asian population. Here, hold on, that's yellow. Here we have our Black students, our Latinx students, our multiracial students, and I will say a caveat, we didn't start tracking multiracial until 2013, so the rest of this data starts 2012. Our Native American students is this green here, and our Pacific Islander students is this yellow.
What's the sample size, generally speaking?
This is all of our, the entire district.
Okay.
So a way that we've been able to do this is that we have data sharing agreements with the district where we're able to have the huge challenge for folks. So we will have an activity in a few minutes to discuss this. It took years to get there, I will say, as a caveat. It's not something that just immediately happened. And a big part of that is because our school district did already have that established relationship with community from that we began with tragedy story. So they knew the power of community and changing things and galvanizing. And so as we worked to develop data sharing agreements with them, they gave us aggregate data at first, and throughout years, we're just like, hey, we need some disaggregated data, because we can't necessarily make change unless we know who is not getting the attention that needs the attention the most, and then we can develop strategies to target some of these populations. Other comments? I know I heard some giggles, and that is a struggle for folks. Yes?
So I giggle, but I'll vote on that. So please tell us how you got anything done with your district. We bring it up, very helpful. The question I had, or I guess the aha, is looking at the upward line for Native American students and wondering what, what was the impetus for that, and is it at all something that can be scaled across other student groups so that we can see the same sort of?
Yeah. I'm going to say and this is what's challenging about being a backbone organization, there's no one solution, right? There's no one thing that happened to make something happen. It is many people coming together, so we don't know what thing was the thing to hook, but we do know that the togetherness and the power of the togetherness did help increase some rates. So I know for our Native population, we began to do more targeted outreach around what kinds of information were they getting about college? Were they being encouraged to go to college? The school district did, they partnered with some resource staffing. And so if you know anything about Tacoma, we definitely still have a very prominent Native population presence. So the Puyallup people live in Tacoma. They have their own school system. Some of them attend our school system. And so then we started talking to one another. Like, what are their students getting that our public school students are not getting, and vice versa. So opening up some resources definitely helped. I saw another hand.
I know you just had mentioned the sample size was the entire district, but how many students are in the Tacoma Public School?
Oh, great question. Sorry, and I didn't mention that. So if we're talking about seniors, let's just say every year seniors, we're talking about 2,000-ish, give or take, depending on the class. Yeah.
I get just a comment, and I guess it'll lead to a question, which is, like, we're talking about college enrollment here, and a lot of it, which I think is a little bit different from, let's say, like high school and attendance, right? Like high school graduation and attendance, like most people would agree that, like, well, like, up to 100% attendance would be pretty darn good, or graduation, up to 100% graduation, that'd be pretty darn good. Not a lot of people will gripe with that. But then when we're talking about college, I'm sure there are a lot of people who say the goal is not 100% college attendance. And then so if that is not the goal, what is the goal? And given that you're working with the community, for instance, like we're looking at the Asian group, like one way to look at that is there was no progress in 7 years, and that's a bad thing. Or you could say 62%, that's exactly where we want to be, and like that's, and then, so we're just wondering how you're interpreting this data, and what's cause for concern, what's not cause for concern.
So this data for us initially was just a baseline. So we want to be agnostic data representers. So we are surfacing this data to community in a way where we can say, you can interpret the data this way, or you can interpret the data this way. If we are responsible community members, we will try to increase these numbers. And so from our end, from the organizational end, yes, we want to increase these numbers. And I'll share, we just recently went through a strategic planning process where we set our goal, I'm gonna butcher this a little bit, but I have this in a future slide, where we have 70% of Tacoma Public School students will have a good earning wage job or within 6 years of high school graduation, regardless of their pathway. So if they choose to go to college, if they choose to go to an apprenticeship, if they choose to go straight to workforce, if they choose to get certificated for some reason. That's going to be a little difficult because we did say within 6 years, so our 2030 goal, the results of our 2030 goal are not going to be seen until 2036. And so we are working with, we have something called Workforce Central. They're doing a lot of tracking. We are working to develop data sharing agreements with other agencies to see what that looks like for us. We're working with business owners to say, like, how can you retain our students at your business in a way where they feel they belong at the business and are not necessarily dealing with, as we heard earlier today, like some institutional and racist practices that not only happen within the educational system, but when students leave the educational system, they're also dealing with that from a different lens. If that makes sense. Any other questions before I move on? Yes.
Do you have a large population of Marshallese?
Of what?
Marshallese and your Pacific Islanders?
So here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that disaggregated data.
Okay.
So when we're talking about these data sharing agreements, we're realizing that who we get these agreements from, they don't have that. So we're pushing to break that down even more.
Okay. Because I would say probably between 2012 and 2019, you've had an increase in population of Pacific Islander anyway. Yeah, with some, just seeing that and knowing the influx, it would be good to have some raw numbers too.
There's also, I will share, this is not necessarily part of our school district, but there is a organization in our town that provides GED classes to immigrant communities. So that actually gave me a really great idea to loop in some of their work and some of their data into some of these presentations and this that we share out to the public. All right, any last minute questions before I move on? No? Okay. So you saw this data. We know that there's been an overall 10% decline. And here are some of the strategies that came out of that. So TCSN, so I'm going to focus on TCSN for a little bit, but then move on to something that is a subset of TCSN in partnership with. So we have, I'm going to start with this middle one, funding your future. So TCSN has 4 work groups, one of which is funding your future. They are focused on increasing FAFSA, WASPA is our state aid, increasing those rates so that the conversation with students is about what do you want to do when you step into a college world rather than how are you going to afford this. So something that they decided to do was, why not let students be the ones guiding the strategies behind this work. They partnered with an organization that provides jobs to students and provides a 0.5 credit to students to essentially create this, what we're going to call a workplace opportunity. So they got stipended $1,000 for this work, got half a credit. And the work that they did with Funding Your Future was essentially, you are the ones telling us what we need to do as adults to better reach the population that you have influence over. So we try to diversify the students. We try to make sure that we got the jocks, the non-jocks, just like every single type of student, so we can broaden that sphere of influence. They came up with ways to bring this information forward, whether it was presenting in their classroom, whether it literally was, hey friend, come over to this resource. I will make sure that you get connected. And then they did a warm handoff to an adult who was a content expert. So that's someone that can help them with their FAFSA or their WASFA, answer questions about scholarships or essay writing or applications overall. Sometimes they were also college admissions representatives, so we have some college admin folk that are a part of these groups. So they were able to triage who at their institution would be the right person to get connected with. The other Tacoma Completes, we're going to go to 2 and Through. So the 2 and Through team is actually a subset of 2 organizations within TCSN. One that focuses on college admissions, or college access, sorry. The other that does a little college access, but they do a lot of persistence work. So they have some leadership classes with a cohort of students at different institutions. And so that's how they came up with the 2 and Through team. Together, they decided to essentially work on what we call a student voice research report. This, we did very similar to our presenter, did interviews with students who dropped out of college in good academic standing. And essentially say, like, why are you leaving this institution if your grades are great? And so it surfaced a lot of information for us as our own organization, but also for the rest of our folks around the Graduate Tacoma movement. Like, sure, it's great for us to push students along, but if they're not being successful, we need to change what's happening on the front end. And so we realized finances were a big one. We realized belonging was a big one. And we also realized that there's a sense of like how one interacts with adults in these spaces in a way where one feels respected. And so examples of that were when you disagree with the professor, so someone in a position of power, and you have a different viewpoint, how can you engage in that dialogue respectfully? And so we also found out institutionally there's a lot of work that we need to do in our post-secondary education. And then our Tacoma Completes, it's beginning as a pilot. So our local community college and our local four-year institution, the majority of our college-going students go to one of those 2. And so they are both coming up with strategies to focus on retention. Our local community college is doing a near-peer mentor pilot. They also have a shared position. So between these 2 institutions, one FTE focuses on transfer students. So if we know that a student's going to start off at the local community college and then transfer, they are automatically routed to this one counselor who they both share and can better inform them around that transition. And then on our four-year institution within Tacoma Completes, they are focusing on internships. So how do students see themselves in their career path so that they know that there's a next step after this 4-year journey that they're going in their BA program or BS program. Any questions on some of these? Yes?
The strategies that your collective action organization, so I'm curious as to, did the strategies evolve from a work group, or how did you settle on those as well?
Yeah. So yes, all of these are work group based. That's what's wonderful about it. So part of the connecting and convening component of what we do is essentially, let's come together and let's brainstorm or have like a zero judgment space for us to think through what is possible. So we're not talking about the barriers that the system present to us. We're talking about what's our goal, and then let's deal with the barriers later, but let's like develop that goal. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, for the 2 and Through team, could you talk a little bit about how is the student's story or their qualitative data held onto from access to success and persistence work, and what does that data exchange look like between the 2 entities who work in access and success?
Yes. So, and I'm gonna answer this, and if I don't get at what you want, please let me know. So it's essentially a focal point of a lot of the stories. So yes, we did this research, but now we have this, well, we've always had this model, but it actualized the motto of not for us, without us. So we will not engage in work in service to someone without that someone being the focal entity of the design piece and the design work. Does that answer the question? Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Other questions? No? Okay. And so this is actually what came out of the pandemic. So the TCSN group had those subgroups, and the other two groups were part of TCSN members. But when the pandemic hit Washington, we closed down around the second or third week of March. Our seniors did not know what to do. A lot of them did not have computers. A lot of them may not have had internet. Their career counselor was suddenly not available because we just didn't know how to operate in a virtual world. The members that sat at this collective action table essentially said, well, can we survey the students to see what are their needs, and then can we triage those needs to an organization that focuses on that. So year one, the priority was just like rapid response, let's get something going, and then like let's focus on those that are attending college. So we had about a 21% response rate of our seniors. That was, let's see, strategies behind that were anything from, here's a QR code, you're in line to pick up your cap and gown. While you wait, scan this QR code, take the 3 minutes to fill this out, and then you're gonna get triaged to someone. That's one strategy. Another one was essentially, it's like fill this out, enter a raffle. And so every building kind of had their own way of doing this, but the goal was, let's get all of our seniors to do this. Then year two, the expansion, two things happened year two. We actually hired a contractor to be the triaging person. In year one, it was a 3-person body dealing with this, and we realized like 3 people at the helm was not the best thing. And so year two, we had a short-term contractor to be at the helm, and the priority was essentially, regardless of pathway, we're gonna help the student. So we opened it up from college-going students to anyone doing workforce, military, training, apprenticeship, whatnot. Year three, it was essentially about the quality of engagement. So how are we engaging with the students from an earlier stage and expanding that service throughout the summer? So they end school around June, but we know a lot happens between June and September. So how can we still remain available for these students during that time when school has shut down? And then community can step in. And then our goals for year three, so this is graduation class 2023, we want to roll out this survey earlier. Part of the reason we want to do that is because relationship building with students is really important. And so we have a greater opportunity to do that, to increase our student response rate, to increase essentially the relationship that students have with these adults, and to essentially build that trust with students so that they feel comfortable, you know, reaching out to the adult in July as opposed to this being done in May when there's like more people available. And we definitely want to scale this out to more districts. So part of what we are doing as a foundation is we started off in Tacoma. We are going county-wide in the future. So we don't have data sharing agreements with the other districts, but there are districts who are interested in some of this work. And so we want to help those districts develop their own galvanized community so that we can implement a version of this at a different school district. Questions? Yes.
I'm sorry if I missed this. Can you just share the purpose of the survey? Who it's for, who gets the data, who uses it for what?
Yeah. So the data, depending on the answers, different people get the data. So our triage person determines, is the student need high school related? If so, this information goes to the counselor. Is the student need FAFSA or WASPA related? Then this information goes to someone that can help out with that. Is it related to college admissions? Then that goes to the institution that the student said, I'm interested in applying to these colleges. If it's multiple colleges, multiple people get the information. And this is also all what we're going to say student-owned data. So the students are telling us what they need and what they want out of the experience. And so that is, some of that is going to relate to some partnerships that we have with the district, and others are going to relate to some partnerships we have with the colleges. Other questions? None? So something that I want to highlight about this is that it began with a need, like a rapid need. So between March and June, we had to design the data, design the survey, implement it, get the data, get information out to whoever it needs to go out to, and then essentially come up with a result of this work. Not a lot of time to do that. However, the pressure of it all kind of forced us into a situation where we were able to do that. We allowed ourselves to essentially be okay with failure, and I air quote failure purposefully because everything came up with a lesson that we then iterated on the following year. It highlighted our need for coordinated support, not just for the students, but coordinated support for the adults in the room. We sometimes forget that as service providers, we also need help. And so it kind of surfaced like the kinds of help that different institutions needed. So whether you were a school district that needed information on college work because the priority was just getting people their high school credit, or if it was folks losing staffing because people were dealing with childcare at home. So there's many needs that were surfacing, not just from the students, but our service providers. And then the idea of planning something small and then scaling it came up. So like incubating and really zero judgment zone spaces became a value. So part of connecting and convening, it surfaced the value of connecting and convening when we don't put boundaries on our own selves. We're going to move on to a small little activity. And I know that many people might be prone to not follow these instructions. I know that I am not someone to follow instructions when these are given. But we're going to essentially, let's see, is it feasible to do groups of 3? Do you all think that we can do that? Let's see, 3. All right, let's do groups of 3. And let's actually, of your group, and I'm also checking time and very cognizant of this. So making sure that we get you out by 11:40. So we're going to do, in your groups of 3, we're going to do 3 minutes of people kind of sharing a challenge that you're dealing with, either at your home organization or within your own community. And so after that, and I'm going to keep time, after that we're going to then determine one person to speak on the issue. So who are you going to focus on? And then we're going to go through a little activity. So let's do the first 3-minute session in your groups of 3. I'll keep time and I'll let you know, and then walk you through the rest. Any questions before we begin? No. All right, let's kick it off. 3 minutes. Let's do some group share out around what happened in your group and then any follow-up questions. I did shift the slide to these 2 questions just as we came back together, but if there are any lingering thoughts or comments, now is the time. Who would like to volunteer to go first? Oh, now we're quiet? What? No. Yes.
Okay, so we talked about so much that it's a little bit hard to bring it all together, but a lot of themes that came up was access to college success and how do we bridge the gap from high school to matriculation, not just getting into college, but actually going and then hopefully graduating. And then we talked some about in terms of collective action layers, we need to address more of these qualitative variables to determine what those barriers of success really are, and so that, like you were discussing in your presentation, we can send out resources collectively to hopefully improve outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you.
We talked a bit about the students that are no longer in our system post-pandemic, and how significant that is just in terms of overall numbers, and thinking through the extent to which the product we're offering now is meeting their needs, or if they're voting with their feet and pursuing other avenues. And that affects both what's happening at the secondary level, but also that post-secondary, in terms of whether pursuing community college or university, or going straight to the workforce, even some of the challenges that we face in terms of how do we access that data in terms of tracking students as they move from one level to the next. But we're feeling in the K-12 system a significant decrease in just the overall number of students that we have post-COVID as opposed to 2019 and before.
I mean, just go ahead. I can share if you guys feel free to. But I would say one of the reflections of the group, or the way that I heard across both their stories, is they're talking about different parts or access pieces into the transition between post-secondary and the K-12 world and trying to support schools and think better about serving students around that. Was that how do you design learning systems that allow you to learn more about what's happening in the system so that you can attend to the variability and being able to figure out, being able to track that in thoughtful ways so that you can respond systematically to it. So yeah, I thought they both had that kind of situation of how do we tap into what's happening so that we can create ways to respond in real time to the students that need it most. And truly understand what's the actual problem we're trying to solve.
Awesome, thank you. Others? Yeah.
I'll just add in, we talked a lot about what we're sharing, and we're actually in a unique position because the three of us actually operate in the same city, so it made it very interesting and a robust conversation nonetheless. But our kind of, we reflected a bit on the call to action of Dr. Walton from this morning on how do we structure aspiration, because a lot of what we talked about, you all spoke about, we talked about. And it's that how, and I even took it a bit further and said, and when, right? The how and the when, because I think there's a lot of conversation around how to structure aspiration, but when I reflect back on our work and my colleagues here in Philadelphia, it's the when do we structure aspiration, because so often when we're working with young people, they're so far behind the curve on where they need to be to attain whatever that aspiration is that they have. We oftentimes feel like we're up against the wall and having to redirect or course direct to make sure they're set up for success. And so it's that when time frame that we spoke a bit about. Not claiming we have the answers, but we started to unpack a little bit that call to action as we're being reflective on our own community.
I do want to comment one piece to that, and I'll go back to this slide here. The way we have our network structured, we are a cradle to career agency, and so we go as far as early learning as an intervention point. I focused on TCSN as the college piece, and thematically our conference is college related, but the when, depending on what your capacity is, that could be different, and who sits at each one of these circles could be different. But together, not to do a Captain Planet reference, but with their powers combined, something can happen, right? All right, others? No one? All right. So I'll end with this. This is actually our 2030 goal, our Graduate Tacoma Movement 2030 goal. what we did in creating this goal was essentially bring in system leaders. So we're talking about city government, we're talking about our school district, we're talking about our post-secondary institutions, we're talking about businesses, we're talking about a bunch of people coming together to say, like, what is it that we want to strive for? And to the question earlier around, like, what is that number? We settled on 70. Ideally, yes, 100% of students will have this. But we settled on 70. If we see more, we will celebrate more. If we see less, we will do better next time. Not to say, and these next 10 years are years for us to begin to develop the relationships that we don't currently have to meet the metrics that we need to track in order to see success in these pieces. I'll encourage you to visit graduatetacoma.org/data to see part of our data transparency is making sure everyone has access to this data. So I'll encourage you to visit that and see what we're tracking. And that's actually going to shift in the next year or so as new indicators roll in based on this goal. Yes?
And I just wanted to share, because as you're rounding out, it occurred to me that we had an exchange which might be valuable given your collective action approach, which is that, I'm sorry, your name again? Malcolm. His program works in partnership with the university, and he was asking a lot of questions that were really reflective of how his program can improve. And one of the outputs of our conversation is that it's as much about, now that he has a perspective about how students perceive that university and whether or not that's an optimal choice for them, he's in a really good position to offer reflections back to that institution. So sometimes our learning isn't just for ourselves. Our learning can inform the overall ecosystem and help create improvements so that we don't feel completely solely burdened as the one who has to solve everything.
Yeah. And I will say, to surface that, very often we live in silos in our work, and once we open up that opportunity, we have a chance to move forward. Thank you so much, appreciate it. It is time for us to move on. Appreciate the presence.